Hello and welcome to this podcast. Today I'm here with Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hello again.
We're talking about the types of anxiety and the differences between them. And you're mainly to do with hypnotherapy, aren't you, Mark?
I'll use a lot of hypnotherapy, but we use a lot of other skills such as NLP, tapping, neural plasticity. So it's whatever gets results, really.
So that'll be really interesting to hear on your part as well.
Good. Yeah.
Let's get started. So, I'm wanting to hear a bit more of general anxiety disorder, also known as GAD. So, would you be able to explain a bit about that, please?
Okay. So if you work within sort of the psychology or the NHS system, they label anxiety in different ways. And general anxiety is just that. It's the generalized, just we're feeling a bit nervous, we're feeling a bit off, we feel a bit anxious. Um, and it's kind of when there's no particular cause of it, is that they call it generalized or general anxiety.
Okay, that's really interesting. So what would be the effects of general anxiety disorder?
Well, the typical symptoms are there's not any particular trigger. It's just we feel in that state of anxiety or fight or flight all the time. It's sort of a general feeling. We get up in the morning, we feel anxious, and that usually goes through the day. Whereas the other types of anxiety usually have some sort of trigger. Sort of social anxiety might be while we're around other people, or panic is caused by situations that make us really anxious when we hit the panic high, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense, and thank you for explaining that. What's the difference between panic disorder and general anxiety disorder?
Ooh, well, again, these are the labels that psychology kind of put on it. So for us, when clients come to work with us in the clinic, is we look at the symptoms, we look at what's going on, and then we kind of give people tools to put it right. But the NHS would turn around and say, right, you've got panic disorder because you're always in a state of panic and you're regularly having panic attacks. And that's usually the difference between anxiety and panic attacks is that the anxiety levels get too high and people go through and have a full-blown panic attack.
Okay, so would that link to like social anxiety as well?
Well, it can do. So social anxiety is usually people are feeling really nervous or anxious around other people. So that could just be they have to go for a night out and they feel absolutely awful at the idea of meeting strangers, or maybe they're going onto buses or trains. But again, once that anxiety level gets too high, that can trigger panic attacks. And it's quite interesting that there's all these definitions, but there's very fine lines between them. And sometimes we see people who come in have been diagnosed with one type of anxiety where actually it's another type. And it's just quite often we take on what we're told we've got. Whether or not these are useful for some people, I think it is useful to be diagnosed with having a problem. But for us, it's more like, right, what is it we're going to do? How do you want to be instead? And what tools do we use to get you out of that anxiety state of whatever type it is to feel calm, relaxed, and in control?
Okay, so do you mainly focus on just the symptoms, not the diagnosis?
Certainly. So I'm classed as a clinical hypnotherapist, a master NLP practitioner, and a few other things. And we are not allowed to diagnose. That is not our area of expertise. Typically, you'd go off to your doctor when you think you've got an anxiety problem, and they would either diagnose it themselves or pass you off onto an expert in certain areas, say a psychologist, who will then give you that diagnosis. And again, sometimes people feel a benefit for knowing what that is. But yes, we kind of just sit there and say, what are the symptoms? How do we want to feel instead? And that's what we do as we work through to it. We can spend forever going over the symptoms, but it doesn't really help. Not for the sort of work that we do.
Yeah. So if you see somebody with anxiety, for example, what sort of things would you do to help them with that anxiety? Um, I'm sure it depends on person to person, but like just generally.
So usually what we do is when we do the assessment and during the first session is first of all we look at what's going on, and the first thing is we look at panic attacks. If people are experiencing panic attacks, because that's quite an interesting one that a lot of people get anxious about panic attacks because they're just waiting for that to come along, and if that's in front of other people, they feel pretty bad. So the first thing we do with panic attacks is we give them something called a bilateral exercise, which is where they're passing an object such as a juggling ball from hand to hand. And the reason why we do this is typically when people are feeling anxious or panicky, the brain's firing that electricity along the neural pathways into the amygdala. Well, just passing something from side to side or doing similar exercises lights up the brain electricity wise either side of the amygdala, and it stops those panic attacks pretty quick. If it's general anxiety or any sort of anxiety, what I do is I revive somebody back, as we did in a previous podcast. I revive people back to the last time they felt anxious, and I look at what's going on. And typically, what we see is people breathe very, very shallowly in the center of the chest, which means the breathing's not right. And then we'll give them exercises to start breathing so that the belly's moving in and out. We'll also do a positive revive, as we went over. Is like we'll go back to a time when they felt calm and relaxed, and we'll get them to model that. And really, that the first exercise we do, and this is such a big thing with what we do, is we help people just to scan the system and notice what's going on and question it for a minute or two. And that's interesting that when we question what we're feeling rather than just reacting to it, it kind of takes away quite a bit of the fear. You know, we're so terrified of these symptoms, but if we get interested in it and notice what's going on, and we ask people to give it a color, a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, to notice the posture, to notice the breathing, and then we get them to do a daft little exercise of bringing up a great big stop sign in the head. They can even shout out loud, stop, which kind of interrupts those like neural pathways firing. And then we teach them to breathe deeply. We do some visualization. We get them to go back to a time when they're happy. And if they do this exercise repeatedly, what we see over a couple of weeks is that they get interested in the anxiety. It starts to go down. But every time they get anxious, they push themselves into a good mental state. And it's like building a muscle. The more we practice things, the easier that becomes. So for me now, somebody who used to be terrified of public speaking, you can just push me onto a stage and I can flick a switch in my head and stand up and talk about anything you give me as a subject. And it's just nice to see people being able to do that as they recognize the unwanted mental state and slowly move over into a better one. And that's
That's
kind of one of
really
the
interesting.
basic exercises that we do. But again, we've got a lot of them. That's the great thing about hypnosis and NLP is there's quite a few. So it depends on the individual, and different exercises work better for different people.
Would you be able to tell, like, if somebody would be able to deal with that certain type of hypnosis just by like reading about them or like just talking throughout like what they need specifically?
So the process for us is we get on and we do about a 30-minute assessment call. And I want to know if they're having panic attacks, when their anxiety is worse, if there's been any trauma. You know, I'm looking at all the regular things that we work with, which takes about 30 minutes. And then I need to know that that client is willing to put in maybe a 20 or 30 minutes a day, because those that do the homework have got a much, much higher success rate than those that don't. So I'm waiting to see that the person is in the right place, which is what we call transcendence. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it's kind of that's the state where they're ready, where they turn around and say, right, I've had enough of living like this, and I'm willing to put in the work to do to get into that better state. And if people are in that state, that's when we take them on, and that's when we bring them in and we use all these different tools. Now, hypnosis, although there was a bit of hypnosis in the tool I just explained, it's not the only tool we use. And most people can be hypnotized, but not everybody allows themselves to be hypnotized. Some people are so terrified. In fact, a good friend of mine came in and just was not up for it. She's such a control freak. It was really funny. But most people can be hypnotized, and we all go in and out of hypnosis dozens of times every day. And it's kind of, we look and we say, which of these tools is going to work best? And to give you a good example, we had a lady came in a few months ago, and she hadn't been quite so truthful during the assessment call. So when she came in, she was physically shaking. There were lots of other things going on. She wasn't eating properly. She wasn't exercising. She just wasn't doing the things that she should be doing as a human being. And she was nowhere ready to be hypnotized. However, we went through and used some really calm exercises and things. And it took us a couple of sessions more, but then she was in the right place to do that.
That's really interesting. So you talk about this like different hypnotic states that we go through throughout the day. Would you be able to explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so hypnosis it's a model. We're trying to explain what's going on. And to be honest, we're not 100% sure, except for when we use functional MRI scans. So the way that I explain it to clients is that we get up in the morning and we go through different mental state to mental state. And the first one is brushing your teeth. If you brush your teeth with your dominant hand, you don't even think about it. You get up, you brush your teeth, and you think about something you might be doing at college or at work. And really, we're doing that hypnotically. We do it without thinking about it. It's not a conscious process. And if people want to have fun with that, they could try brushing the teeth with the other hand. And with the non-dominant hand, we have to think about it. We're lucky if we get to 30 seconds. There'll be blood involved and there'll be a terrible pain in the wrist. So one's automatically and one's not automatically. We do it consciously. And we have lots of other states where we do that. So a good example would be when we get doom scrolling on our phone. We just get stuck in that mobile phone and we scroll and we scroll. Or when we watch the telly. We know when we're watching the telly, they're not real people. They're actors, it's a set, but we can really get drawn in. And these are all different types of hypnosis. In fact, some experts believe that we're always in one state of hypnosis or another. And it could be argued that anxiety is a hypnotic state because we do it automatically. We know that to have anxiety, we have to do anxiety, but we don't do it on purpose. We do it unconsciously. And in that state, I'm stopping one hypnotic state and moving somebody into another one. And there's lots of processes we do hypnotically. Another big one would be driving the car. The amount of times people jump into a car, they drive, and they don't remember everything in between, and they get there and they think, well, that's interesting. But when we first start to drive, we've got so many processes that we have to do consciously, but over time we turn that into an unconscious process. And it's very similar to sort of daydreaming. It's a lovely state. It's not sleep. I know a lot of people think it is sleep because those stage hypnotists are always going on sleep. It's not. It's a very different process. So hypnosis, yeah, it's something we go in and out of every day. There's lots of times we do it when we zone out or watch the TV. And if people can do that, then they can be hypnotized. But again, some people don't let themselves be hypnotized.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So what do you think about PTSD?
So PTSD is a kind of a much stronger form of anxiety. Um, and again, it's a label. And really, there's been some severe trauma. So it's really interesting that when we're born as babies, I don't know if we've covered this before, when we're born as babies, we've only got two fears. One's falling over and the other one's loud noises. But somebody just has to scream and hit the wall and shout spider, and that can install a spider phobia into somebody. Now, that extra emotion just means that process learns, it happens much faster. So PTSD is usually where somebody's been through an extreme form of trauma. That extra emotion installs that problem much, much faster. And one of the downsides of that diagnosis is people then think they are really severe. And for us, we don't see it that way. It's just, yes, there's the same pattern going on in the brain as anxiety, but we can usually clear that as quickly as possible. And then we've also got CPTSD, complex, which is usually where people haven't just been through one traumatic event, it could be years and years of abuse. And again, that's kind of labeled as that can be really, really severe. But I remember just before I actually started working as a therapist many years ago, I witnessed a guy who'd been out into war zones and had seen villages, dozens and dozens of villages of dead people. And he came back and he was basically an alcoholic and he couldn't function. And he went off to one of the guys who became one of my trainers, and they had him within a couple of weeks back out and working and doing really, really well. And this is where different types of therapy are important because some of them have got much faster results. So PTSD, yeah, it's a strong diagnosis. It just kind of means it's a little bit stronger. But as it comes to fixing things, it's something we can usually do as quick as regular anxiety.
That's really interesting. And what type of therapy would you normally do for somebody with PTSD or CPTSD? Would you do typically the same thing as the anxiety therapy?
Um, so one of the things we've got to look at is trauma. So trauma is a horrible event that can happen to us, and it can cause instant sort of anxiety things going on. So there is within NLP, we've got different things, and we call this. There's different ways of calling it. Let me think of the best way. What's the name of it? Sorry, you have to excuse me. My brain's gone absolutely blank. There's an exercise we use where we take people the rewind technique. Sorry, there you go. It's just different trainers give it different names. The rewind technique's really interesting. So let's imagine I've got somebody with severe trauma. I would sit them down, get them really relaxed so they're almost in trance, and I'd get them to imagine that they're sitting in a chair watching themselves on the television going through that traumatic event. And one of the things we'd do is I'd say to them, I want you to imagine you're looking at that telly, but I want you to drain all the color out of that picture. And then I want you to make it grainy and shrink it down. And then what I'll do is I say, I want you to go right to the start of that event. And I want you to quickly spin it right the way through to the end. So we do it in seconds. And when they get to the end, I remind them that they're fine and they're okay. And then I get them to quickly rewind it backwards and go to the start where they're okay. And we repeat this backwards and forwards. And sometimes I'll get them to step out of themselves, looking at the chair with them in it, watching that television screen. And we rewind and fast forward and rewind and fast forward. And for some reason, that trauma pattern in the brain falls to bits. So I've had people terrified of spiders, wasps, and typically for that phobia to start, they've gone through some trauma of either being terrified by a spider or that they've been with somebody else who suddenly reacts to that spider and goes into a state. And by using that rewind technique, it's quite nice because they're not getting right into it. They're disassociated. They're in a chair watching it on a screen. We flow it backwards and forwards. And let's just say that when we start working with them, they're a 10 out of 10 every time they think of that spider. It quickly comes down to sort of like a 3, a 2, and a 1. So that would be one technique I would use with trauma. The other one that's really, really powerful is this thing called EFT tapping. Have you seen this before? Emotional freedom technique. We have these points on the body, a bit like acupuncture and acupressure, where we tap. And Chinese medicine call them meridians. You've got other religions call them chakras. Is that we tap on these energy points, which is really silly. Sorry, trying to do this when you're looking at yourself. And while they're doing that, we would also, at the same time, get them to use some language. So again, a good example, I had a lady who was terrified of going swimming. And I took her back to it and said, right, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is this fear of your water as you start to get into it? And it was up there in a 10. And then I said, give it a name. And she just said, the fear I'm going to drown. And it's pretty high. And then it was just something like she started tapping the top of her head. And I said to you, just say to her, say to yourself, this fear of water, I release and let it go. And we move down to above the nose. This fear of water, I release and let it go. And we go to the side of the eye, under the nose, just above the chin, onto the collarbone. And at the end of it, we get them to grab the wrist, breathe in, close their eyes, and just say release as they let that go down. And typically, if we've got a 10 out of 10, it'll drop to about a 7 or an 8. And then we'll do it again and we'll take it down to a 5, and then a 3. And we always work to take it down to 0. And what I like about tapping is I can teach people to do this to go home and work on it. But one of the weird things with tapping is quite often there was a lady I had a severe stomach problem. She came to me when I had the health food store. And she was trying every pill and potion to sort the stomach issue out. And I just took her into the back office. I started tapping with her. We got it down to about a 5. And then I said to her, "Is there something else coming in?" I could see this funny look on her face. And she said, "Yes. There's an argument with me when I was 18 and my mother." So we started to tap on that layer, as we call it. And she said it just dropped out of her and it never came back again. Now, that looks absolutely ridiculous if you've never seen it before, but I've used it for sexual abuse. I've had it for phobias. I've had it for severe anxiety. And it's just something nice we can do ourselves just to take it down. So if somebody woke up with anxiety at a 7 out of 10, I'd get them to spend 20 minutes tapping like that to take it down. And that's a really weird little tool. It's not part of hypnosis, it's not part of NLP, but it's called emotional freedom technique. And the first one I learned used to be a very long-winded sort of process. Now that's very rapid, and usually within 10 minutes we can take those unwanted thoughts, feelings, phobias away, and it works really nicely.
That's really interesting, and I suppose going through each part of your like your head and the cheek and things like that, it sort of like gets it away from the pressure points when normally people feel that stress and anxiety.
It's a weird process. We don't really know why it works. It's based on Chinese energy medicine. So one of the thoughts is that you command the brain or the mind to bring the problem to the front. And then as we tap, we're telling it to sort the problem out. Other people claim it's a type of self-hypnosis, which I love self-hypnosis, and I can see in a way it is. But then it is claimed, I don't know if you've ever heard of, I think it's called Kylan photography. This is where if ever you go to a mind, body, spirit fair, there's people who can take a photo of your aura or your energy field. And it is amazing that we can tap, we can take a picture before and then tap on the body and take that problem away. And when we take a photo again, massively, that energy field has become bigger. There is another side to tapping. So the first part I've just explained is where we would take the problem away. But the second part is we would stand up and we tap in this little V here. But we do this with positive affirmations and we'd use a bit of fun. So I get people to stand up with some volume and they think I'm crazy when I do this in the clinic. But we'll say something, "Today I feel amazing. All my systems are online. I'm learning lots of new skills and I feel really, really great." And then we use more volume and we tap on it again and again and again. And it's amazing when we do this is that you feel the energy flying up and down your back. And if I do it in groups, it was really weird. I did it at a workshop I did. 4 or 5 of the ladies had to get out the room because they said the energy was too strong. These people were empaths. Now, again, we don't know exactly why tapping works so well. We've got lots of ideas. But when I see somebody with a severe problem that goes within 15 minutes, it's magic. But it doesn't work for everybody. Some people think it's so weird, they just don't like to use it. But there's loads of information you can find on Google about emotional freedom technique.
Oh, I'm definitely gonna read up more about that. That's
Mm.
really interesting. Um, so that's all my questions over.
Oh,
Uh,
that was nice and quick.
I know. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Well, maybe is another technique that we like to do is self-hypnosis. So we talked about hypnosis is a state that we go in and out of every day. And typically with anxiety clients towards the end of the program we work with them is we teach them how to use self-hypnosis. And self-hypnosis is by using a type of language to take us into trance. And it's quite nice because it means you can, again, like EFT, you can make your own changes or improvements. And typically what I'd do is I'd get somebody to sit down for maybe 5 minutes. And the first thing I ask them to do is how long they want to take themselves into trance for. Because if you don't, you'll take yourself down into trance and you'll stay there till something else nudges you out of it. Second thing is we then say, what is it we'd like to improve? But we have to frame it in a positive way. So if somebody's got anxiety, they will typically say, I want to be less anxious. But they're using the word anxious, which isn't positive. So this is where I have to be a little bit clever and I say, okay, what would less anxious look like? How would you feel? And typically they'll start saying, I want to feel calm, relaxed, happy, and in control. And then I sit them down and I say, right, I want you to imagine you're seeing a nice big video screen. And there's a version of you going through this week, learning to be calm, relaxed, happy, and in control. And I go through, first of all the visual cues. What does it look like to see that version of you going through the week, maybe going to university, being really relaxed as they walk up there? What are they like in public transport? What are they like in the lecture rooms? And they see three or four different types of them going through the situation. And then I go through all the sounds. What does it sound like when we're relaxed, confident, and in control? What's our voice like? What are other people's voices like? And then I ask them to notice what it feels like. And we go through all of that all again. And they see themselves on that video screen making those changes and those behaviors. And then the next step is I get them to imagine that they're floating into that video screen, into that version themselves. And then I want them to really experience it again, but associate it into that version. So it's a type of visualization that we take people into. And it is amazing, again, the changes that people make because you've heard this before, the brain doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination. So the imagination is just as powerful as the reality that can cause problems. So if they then see themselves going through how they want to be and they practice that once a day. And the best way I put this to people when I explain it is it kind of turns you into a large rhinoceros and that you sit and you decide how you want to be for that day. You set your goals and you go charging off, but you've got a really thick skin. And self hypnosis, when that's practiced regularly, is far better to me than meditation because we're not just calming the mind, we're actually changing it. And once we can see and feel and experience the changes that we want to make, we're much more likely to adopt them. So, can you think of any times or anything that you might do where you get a little bit nervous or a little bit stressed that you'd like to do a bit better? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what would that look like?
Um, oh God, you put me on the spot here.
Mm,
Um, well, to do things better, I suppose, like maybe talking in front of like a large crowd, say, although I do that quite well now,
yeah.
I would like to work on it a bit more because everyone can't really talk in large crowds
Hmm.
amazingly, like, and get really good positive outcomes of it unless I do it like loads and loads and loads of times. So that's what I would like to see myself in a few years and think to myself, oh, I do this better now because that's what I have done in the past with my podcast. When I look about a year back, it's
Hmm.
completely different to what where I am now, and I'd like to improve on that.
Yeah. So that's a big thing we do. We help an awful lot of people with public speaking. It's regular that we see people who've built businesses and they win an award and then they have to stand up and they're absolutely terrified. And that's exactly where I teach self-hypnosis, is that every night when they go to bed, they'll lie there and see themselves walk up to that stage relaxed and calm. And they notice everything visually and auditorily and kinesthetically, how they do that talk. And they imagine the crowd smiling and taking it in. Because we do the opposite when we have anxiety and fear problems, is that we catastrophize. We look at what could happen and we think about all the things that goes wrong. So this is a way of putting an intention into what we're going to do, but we mentally think in advance, how is it I want to do that? And then we can mix that with if I can coach somebody how to speak well, because speaking is about breathing, it's about posture, it's about being prepared. We can see massive changes in that. I've actually had 4 or 5 clients who've now gone on and speak regularly in clubs because they enjoy the process so much.
That's really interesting. And when you like look back at yourself as well, when compared to like your first ever conference talk, for example, and think back. like from like a year ago, say, like
Mm,
you wouldn't really expect you're coming a long way, but because you do it consistently and because you sort of try and get that sort of catastrophization away from your brain and try and think positively, like say, oh, this is going to be really good
mm,
and stuff like that. Try to like make yourself like think more positively, then you see a dramatic change over the year or how long you've been
mm.
doing it for.
That's it. And so I remember. So I went from having terrible anxiety and a stammer to learning to become a disc jockey. And I've got to be honest, it took me a couple of years to do that. But then when I was working as a DJ, I was great behind the speakers and the lights, but I struggled to speak to the bride and groom. And I had to learn some more skills because I was kind of a bit more naked, if you understand what I'm saying. I didn't have all the equipment there. And I actually started working with a little company. I used to do a sales presentation. And the first time I stood up and did that presentation, I looked a bit like Shakin' Stevens. And for those people who don't know who he was a pop star back in the 80s that could do all this rockabilly stuff with the legs. And my legs were just flacking back and forwards as I was trying to talk. But what happened was I did that presentation really badly. But then when I got to the back of the room, everybody patted me on the back and they had me up there 2 days later and then 2 days again. And in the end, I was doing this presentation 4 nights a week. So you've got to recognize when you first start something, you're going to suck at it. You're not going to be very good at it. But if you do it again and do it again and reflect each time of what you could do better, that small amount of reflection is very, very powerful as a learning curve.
Oh,
And so
definitely.
some people don't like that. They don't like the idea that they're going to be bad at it. But when we first learn to drive, we're not very good at it. And then when we actually pass our test, that's when we actually learn to drive because we do it without somebody else with us. And it's by making mistakes that we learn so much more.
Definitely. And I sort of tend to debrief on my day now. My friend actually spoke about this and she was like, oh, shall we do a debrief on the day? I was like, a debrief? Do you actually debrief on your day? I was like, oh, right. So we started a debrief on the day, talking about what happened, stuff like that. And then afterwards, I thought to myself, actually, I'm going to do that quite consistently every time I do something different or I do something consistently. So I don't know, go to a lecture room and we're talking about classical studies. And one time we're talking about Milgram, and the next time we talk about intelligence and stuff like that. So each time on the lecture, I debrief, and I feel like that sort of makes us remember more and remember how to do something again if it went well or what to improve on.
Yeah, there's a particular exercise I teach to anxiety clients, and I call these the empowering questions. And it's basically I get them to sit down at the end of each day and say to themselves, "What is it I did well today?" And maybe use a little notepad or a journal and write down what you did well, and then ask yourself, how could you do that a little bit better, and how could you use those skills in different situations? But then the best bit is I say, right now, tell me what went wrong. What was awful? So again, you remind yourself of that. And then using your notepad is, what could I do better? How could I do it better? And even if you don't know, you can either go onto Google or YouTube and search how to do something better, or even say to them, just drop me a message and I'll have a look. Now, if you do that for 30 days, that is amazing because you learn a little bit. So I suppose it's very much the same as a debrief. And the amount clients get out of that, because then if they say, oh, I went to the bus stop and I could feel that panic and I had a panic attack. If the question is then, well, what could I've done differently? It might be I stop, I breathe, I use one of the techniques that Mark's taught us, and we stop that panic attack from happening. And that is amazing. It's just such a simple little tool, but it's so, so powerful. And a lot of professionals, a lot of business people start to use that now when they work with us because they just learn from every day rather than just flying through it at the rate of knots and making lots of mistakes.
That's really interesting. And I'll even think about myself, even not only debriefing on the negative things, what I need to change, but even think of the positive things as well. And sometimes, even like once a week, tend to think of three things that are positive and one thing that's negative.
Hmm.
And the aim is, I think, if you think of more positive things than the negative things, and don't weigh it out, I think it's a lot more easier because then you think, oh, there's a lot more positive things that's happened this week than negative things. You try to think of, you end up trying to think of more positive things that you've been doing over time rather than the
Hmm.
negative things. And it's really interesting to think of that part. Even just the simple things like, oh, I typed notes well this week.
Hmm.
It sounds silly, but at least you've done something well this week.
Hmm.
Even if it's just typing notes well this week, or you've listened well, or you've spoke well with your friends and stuff like that. You've managed to accomplish a lot more positive things than seeing things that you've done negatively. And I think it's really interesting to think on that part as well.
There's um there's an interesting book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it talks about the winning principle. And what it teaches you to do is kind of at the end of your day, you sit down and say, what have my wins been this week? And the way the reticular activating system works is the more that we do that, the more it looks for the things that are right. So it might be we get to university on time. It might be, as you mentioned, you've done your notes right, that I ate 3 portions of fruit, which is healthy. And it's funny because usually most people and the way that our minds are trained, especially when we've got anxiety, is we're always looking for the negatives. But if we look for those positives, it's amazing how many wins we do have in life. And this is where language comes in useful in therapy, because the number of times people come into me and say, "Oh, nobody likes me. All my friends hate me," and I'll stop and just ask them. I'll say, "All of them? You know, who did you go out with last week? Did they hate you? Does your mum hate you? Does your dad hate you?" So what we look for, we always find. And it's just about retraining the brain, and mind kind of works for what are the positives today, what are the beautiful things I can see around me. And that works nicely with anxiety because we're always focusing inside rather than focusing on the beautiful things that are out there. And there's plenty of them. At this time of the year, it's getting a bit colder, but the way those trees look and the woods look is absolutely fantastic.
Definitely. And I think that's really interesting. You'll have to definitely send us that book as well. If you ever remember what it's called, because I would have to have a read of that and I'll have to like share it as well with the people on here as well who are listening to this, because I'm sure they would find it interesting too. Um, but yeah, definitely the cold and the darker nights are a little bit depressing, but yeah, you can definitely see some things are even like good. For example, like you get to see the sunrise more in the morning because
Hmm.
you wake up and you'll get to see it more because that's when you'll be driving to work, for example, or you'll hear the birds more. I feel like I hear the birds more. I don't know if anyone else does.
Yeah, definitely.
Um, and also like even just like everyday like things that you don't even notice, like the leaves falling, like that's just amazing how you think like after summer the leaves just fall. Like it sounds really like silly, but like if you start thinking about it more and more, like it's so nice and like it's like a nice feeling when you like have like the leaves falling, but like not really when you're like treading on them throughout when you're walking and stuff, but you
Mm.
know.
Oh, I see. I love that crunch. There's something about walking in leaves, which is really nice.
Oh, you see with my cane, it
Ah, it's lovely.
drags and it's annoying for me, but for like somebody walking on the floor without like a cane, like
Hmm.
I get it, but it's also annoying for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just the little things in life that you sometimes stop and think that is really amazing. And like when I go on a run with my guide runner, we'll go through this bit that's like near us. It's closed at the minute, it's getting work done, sadly. But when you run through it, it's just amazing. And when the sun just um goes down as well. It's just amazing. Like I can't describe the feeling it is. It's so nice just to have that sort of break, just running and
Mm.
just not thinking of anything but thinking of something at the same time. And you can even like apply that when you're walking as well. Just try and not think of anything but like just the scenery and like what you hear around you, and it gets more you're more like interested in like just not looking at your phone constantly, or take your headphones out your ears and just try to listen to your surroundings rather than your music blasting in your ears.
There's an interesting theory by one of my trainers, and he said most people go through life just remembering what's happened there before. In fact, he says quite often we go to restaurants and we don't taste the food as it is, we taste it if we've had it before. And I think that's quite true, including Walt Disney said the same thing. He said most people are just lawnmowers who just go back and forward in life, not really noticing what's happening around them. And one of the things I do teach my anxiety clients is there's two exercises, but one of them is you go for that walk every day and you notice what's changed since the day you've been there before. So for me, on one of my favorite walks is I go out and I start with a field and I look at that field of grass and I notice how that's changed since the time I was there last. And you can notice if that grass is a bit taller, if it's early, there's a steam coming off it. Are there footprints in the grass? Are they human? Are they animal? And then I go to everything I can hear. What's the sound of the traffic like from the last time? The sound of the birds? What else can I notice? And then what can I feel? What's the sun like on my skin, or what's the breeze like? What's my energy level? And then I'd go down to the little burn and I'd do exactly the same again. Is that water clearer or dirtier than last time? Is it higher, lower? Is it slower or faster? And you can just go through everything visually, everything auditorily, and everything kinesthetic over and over again. So, first of all, you can notice how it's changed. And if you practice that all the time, we almost build a video recorder in our head, which is really nice because then if tomorrow I can't get out for that walk, I can sit in my chair and meditate and imagine me doing that walk. And because the brain doesn't know the difference between imagination and reality, I still get a high percentage of that benefit. The other one we can do, which is very similar, is you just positively go and look for the positive things. You can go to the beach. My youngest used to love to do this exercise. We'd walk down the sand, and I say, "Tell me three things you can see that's positive." And it was usually things like, I can see the dogs running back and forwards. I love how the waves are coming out. And it's usually there's a chip shop or an ice cream van somewhere in front of us. And then we could go on to the auditory things, what can we hear? And again, the sound of the dogs, the sound of the sea, and the bells of that ice cream van. And then what can you feel? And it's funny when people do get into a negative rut, if they start to positively look for the positives and play that exercise, again, we change our focus out into the world rather into our own little world. And just simple little exercises like that, repeated again, that's where neural plasticity comes in, which means the brain can rewire itself.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing. And it's been really great to have you back on here as well.
Thank you.
As always, if anyone has any questions, please do leave it in the comment section or go to my Instagram and you can either comment on the announcement that I'm going to leave for this podcast, or you can direct message me, or you can email me at helpvision216@gmail.com. And
Good.
Mark, you want to
Yeah,
uh,
if people want to get in touch with us, there's a couple of ways of doing that. One is we've got some free anxiety resources. If you go to escapeanxietynow.com, on the front page, there's a little form, and we can send you the anxiety relief pack, which is a hypnotic track to sit and relax to. There's an ebook and there's some breathing exercises and some useful videos. Or you can also find me at newcastle-hypnotherapy.com. And on both of those sites, there's a little chat bot at the bottom, chat bot, chat widget at the bottom, and you can drop me a message through there, and I'm happy to chat away with you.
That's really great. Thank you. And thank you everyone for listening as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.